Well, the family of John Barnett, a former Boeing employee who was from Pineville, say they want to keep his message alive. The Associated Press reports Barnett raised concerns about the company's production standards and was found dead in his hotel room in South Carolina on March 9th. Police said his injuries were self-inflicted, according to the Associated Press. And in this KLB exclusive interview, Colin Vidros breaks down how Barnett's family is keeping his memory alive in the months after his death. Colin, what can you tell us?
Well, Johnny, John Barnett's brother Rodney Barnett and mother Vicky Stokes spoke to us about the events unfolding before and after John's death in March. His family says, according to John's former boss, he was one of the most knowledgeable quality control managers in Seattle.
You know, we're doing this to get his message. We're wanting to finish what he started.
Rodney Barnett's the brother and Vicky Stokes, the mother of former Boeing employee John Barnett, are speaking out in support of their family member who died on March 9th from self-inflicted injuries, according to the Associated Press.
We want to carry on his fight for him as the reason we're doing this, and I think that's the only reason that God is helping us through this, to give us the strength to get through it.
Barnett, who worked for Boeing for 32 years, filed a whistleblower complaint alleging safety concerns. Of the 32 years he worked for Boeing, nearly half of those years were spent as a quality manager. He retired from Boeing in 2017 after reportedly alerting managers about substandard parts and oxygen systems. CBS News reported Barnett resigned from Boeing due to, quote, job-related stress.
He was diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety in 2017 due to all of the retaliation that he was facing.
Boeing denied any claims by Barnett that the company used substandard parts and oxygen systems with serious problems, despite his frequent alerts to managers, according to the BBC.
The other whistleblower that comes forward, they can pretty much label him as a disgruntled employee or somebody that has an agenda. They couldn't do that with John because every time they tried, he had the documentation and the proof that what he was saying was the truth.
Barnett's family says it will take some adjustments at Boeing before Barnett's family says they can trust the company.
Boeing needs to put somebody back in charge that knows how to build quality airplanes like we're used to Boeing building. They always had a great reputation. Their signature is on every plane just about flying around the world. And that's what Mitch wanted to see. He was so proud of that company.
We'll continue to capture the impacts of this case as it develops. In the meantime, their family will cherish the moments with John, a kind-hearted person and a Louisiana man through and through.
And he would have crawfish shipped up there and give crawfish boils, and he was just a fun guy. I miss his smile.
Now, Boeing in March released a statement on Barnett's passing, saying in part that Boeing reviewed and addressed quality issues that Mr. Barnett raised before he retired in 2017, as well as any other quality issues referred to in the complaint. We refer you to OSHA with any questions about its 2020 disposition of Mr. Barnett's claims. The attorneys representing Barnett's estate also released a statement in May, stating in part, Mr. Barnett's last words made clear that while Boeing may not have pulled the trigger, the company is responsible for his death. Johnny, back to you.